I mean, it can work. I mean, I've done that at, parachurch events with 1,500 junior hires in the room. I've done a single setting sermon from Ecclesiastes. So it can work, and it can work in a wide variety of environments. But I've also taught through Ecclesiastes in more detail. So, but I wasn't happy when I did a 6-week sermon from Ecclesiastes in the local church. I tried it one time in my first ministry. I just thought, I think I wish I would have approached this a different way. And so I have ever since. I don't want to force that all onto you, but it's just really hard to recreate with 6 different issues over 6 different sermons. Hey, don't build your life on this. Build your life on Jesus. It's just a lot easier if you do that all in one shot. Songs, I don't know, I just sort of ended with that. Walked out of the room, you all walked out of the room. Any issues that you would like to clean up in relationship to that discussion? You may have other questions you want to ask about that particular category of Old Testament wisdom, sexual wisdom, we might term it. Songs approaches the issue differently than Proverbs does. That's where we're going to move next, and that's one of the most natural bridges since the first several chapters of Proverbs deal with some similar material. Songs deals with it in a more positive framework. Proverbs is more warnings. And Songs is more of a positive, celebrative approach to this when approached appropriately. And so I do think, as we start to make that bridge, that one of the dangers comes with always dealing with this from the perspective of the vice lists of the New Testament, which include sexual sins, the put off categories, which deal a fair amount with sexuality. And that stuff is in the Bible. But one of the dangers of that is that every sermon or every teaching that deals with sexuality has a negative vibe attached to it. It's always a bunch of don'ts. And I think what happens as a result of that is through the unbalanced attention to texts, you end up with an unbalanced environment when the subject comes up, and it's no big surprise then that the church isn't viewed as an entity that celebrates sexuality. Because we're always warning. And it's appropriate to warn. But it also ends up almost creating this environment that the church is, the Christians are anti-sex. Now, of course, we always lead into those discussions by saying, no, we're not. But then when everything breaks down to thou shalt not, that's still just the dominant environment in here. And so it's really a tricky issue, because we do need to be careful not to either talk about this so frequently or so graphically that we end up being catalysts. We end up being vehicles for temptation. to put it simply. And even in a class like this, I sit around and think, gosh, I don't want to talk about this too long, because that's not overly helpful. It's like I remember when I was in college, I had a class it was called Family Life Counseling. It was a night class, it was a 2-hour class. It's supposed to be a family class. But for this particular teacher, it was mostly an exploration of human sexuality. Now, all of us in the room, almost all of us in the room, are either engaged or are seriously dating and considering getting engaged. And it just wasn't particularly helpful. It's a 2-hour night class. They're sending you out under the cover of darkness with an hour and a half until curfew, after you've been talking about this for 2 hours every week. And it just wasn't especially helpful. And I think about that in relationship to preaching and teaching, because it's tricky. I mean, the surveys that are out there indicate the thoughts, are fairly present in a person's mind. So to fail to acknowledge that, to act as though, oh, no one ever thinks about this until I bring it up. That's just not reality. At least according to the available evidence. So I think in some ways it's a little silly to just pretend, oh, by raising this issue, I'm bringing factors into the discussion that would never otherwise cross a person's mind. Yeah, we're probably kidding ourselves there. Furthermore, there's nothing you can do to prevent somebody in their mind or with their body from going places God doesn't intend for them to go. So it's not as though you are the only factor influencing what's going on. All preaching and teaching there's spiritual warfare dynamics in all preaching and teaching. God's at work. Forces of darkness are at work to distract, to discourage, or even to get people's minds going in the wrong directions. That is no more true when this issue is under discussion than it is when any other issue is under discussion. You're talking about generosity. I mean, you think forces of darkness aren't at work to convince you, no, I shouldn't, or no, I don't need to, or I deserve, or whatever the case may be. It's not like it only comes, the fact that we hit on this particular issue doesn't mean it's the only issue in which there's spiritual warfare dynamics. I don't think it's any more or less true with this issue than it is any other issue, at least on the basis of the evidence I have available to me. There's only so much I know about spiritual warfare. That being said, it's important to acknowledge that this is a particular area of vulnerability for lots of folks, and that even anytime we surface the discussion, there's power for that to be used for good or for ill. And so I have to decide, do I even take 30 minutes to talk about this in a class? Is it even helpful? What do? You pray about it and you try to be wise and you talk about it some without fixating on it. What I would say about this material is, this is a celebration of sexuality expressed according to God's design. And if we never talk about this material, the positive celebrative element is not addressed. The pray for discernment. Regarding how much to talk about this and the context in which to talk about this. And the other thing I'd say to you, especially as young preachers, get other church behind you on this one. Get other people in the church behind you. You don't want to be out there on a limb all alone on this one. Determine how much you're going to talk about this, to which groups you're going to talk about this. If you're in youth ministry, whether you're going to talk about this in a blended gender setting or you're going to divide the students up. Some of these decisions, I think it's wise to make collectively, so you've got some support, so that when, if someone's upset about something in your approach, so that you've got some backing and some decisions were made as a group and not just by an individual. And I assume you figured out at this point that I don't think the book's primarily about the relationship between Christ and the church. Bernard of Clairvaux preached for 18 years from this particular book and didn't make it through chapter 2. Bernard of Clairvaux, who's a really famous figure in church history, especially connected to the First Crusade, was a famous preacher and teacher. He preached 18 years from this material, and you're thinking, dude, monk with thought issues. Actually, what we're talking about here is he preached for 18 years on the love of Christ for the church from this material, because through church history, there have been groups of folks who think, man, this cannot be about what it looks like it's about on the surface. Church is the bride of Christ. This must be about the love of Christ for the church. Which is, oh, your neck is like a tower. Well, actually, what this is about is how Jesus loves the church. Well, Jesus does love the church. And the church is the bride of Christ. But I really don't think that's the divine intent for this material. There's a lot that goes into this. Within the mystical tradition, especially Christian singles who were mystics, men and especially female devotional writers would often talk about their spiritual relationship with Christ in very romantic terms. And I'm underselling it when I say romantic. What I'm really meaning is almost borders on erotic. Because there's a lot of sexual imagery in the Bible to talk about covenant issues. It's in the prophets, the imagery of adultery, there is a lot of sexual imagery in the Bible that addresses issues that relate to our relationship with God. That's just true. You can blush about that, or you can embrace that, or you can do both, which is what I do. But you can't deny it's there. And there is a powerful symbolic interconnectedness in the appropriate expression of human sexuality and how it symbolizes something about our relationship with the divine. That's just true. And so it's not as crazy as it sounds for Bernard to have connected all that up. but I just don't think it's what the materials primarily do. I'd say even, when you look at the book of Deuteronomy and you see the prohibitions that are contained there, or even some of the cultic practices in the divided kingdom era, where you've got cult prostitution going on, and you've got temple prostitutes. See, these people were actually on the cusp of something profound and true, but they weren't. But they were actually gesturing in the right direction. A particular kind of right. They were on the cusp of something profound. What they were trying to do, what was going on with cult prostitution, is that the prostitute represented the deity. And in the physical union with the representative of the deity, you are expressing something that is designed to point beyond the event